Hey you guys, thanks for joining me again. This is going to be a third part to the videos I posted earlier talking about addict mentality, or the mind of addicts from my perspective, from being around it for most of my life with other people and then falling into it myself later in life. I've been on both sides of the coin. So I'm going to be talking about some things I addressed in those first two parts, following up a little bit on that. And so I've been having a lot of anxiety lately. I haven't really gotten into my anxiety disorder in any of my videos yet. I talk about it a little bit, but I'm sure that some of you can relate. It seems like the older I get, the more anxiety I have about time, which I have an anxiety disorder anyway. I've had it all of my life. Generalized anxiety disorder. So I've always got kind of a low-key anxious personality, or some type of, it does have physical bodily sensations. I went through that many, many years. I'm going to make a video just about that in the upcoming future. But yeah, it seems like the older I get, the more anxiety I have surrounding time. I don't know if anyone out there can relate to that. Just time, about my time being pulled in too many different directions, time running out. You know, as we step into the aging process, I'll be 46 in the summer, and we start to look back over our lives like, what have we accomplished? Where are we going? How are we feeling? Are we really doing what we want to be doing? And we start getting a lot more particular about who we even want to give a second of our time to, or what we even want to give a second of our time to. And, people judge that a lot of the time too. Oh, well, that person's just a jerk, or they're just selfish, or, I guess people think that you're supposed to just run yourself in the ground. But it's really true. As we get older, we become more and more selective and particular about what we even want to lift a finger to mess with. We get tired. Our bodies change. We've been through a lot. It just is what it is. And we know that, most of us with a certain amount of emotional intelligence and self-awareness, we know that life is short. We know. We keep that in our awareness, where some people might not. I don't like to dwell on it, but I do keep it in my awareness that tomorrow's not promised. I mean, when it comes just like that. Blinked right out of existence, and you thought you had all this time. Right. So I always kind of keep that in my awareness. That's why I try to practice gratitude on a daily basis. I try to be in the moment. It took me years and years of having a spiritual tap. Without that, I probably wouldn't have survived. And a lot of this won't be for everybody. That's okay if it's not for you. Go on. That's fine. Go right ahead. I don't mind. But for me personally, through all the shit that I've survived throughout my life, and with the brain chemistry that I was, not only genetics that I was born with, but the things I was exposed to as a child, and just how I'm set up to function with the anxiety and the bouts of depression and lots of insecurities coming up and all of those things. Had I not had a great therapist and mentors, and had the desire in myself to rise above a lot of that, and then the spiritual tap that I've always had. I'm not going to put a label on it. I'm not religious. But the spiritual tap, that's very personal to an individual. However they want to do it, whatever works for them. I've always had that since I was a child. And no, it wasn't. I had something in myself. My parents, my mother sent me to vacation Bible school at different churches. My father was always talking about the Christian Bible. That was all good and fine and everything. But I had something else inside of me, another calling, something else I was drawn to. It started at around 11, 12 years old. Was always drawn to just different spiritual things. I was always drawn to astrology, and I was drawn to the occult for a long time, alternative practices, interested in studying and reading all about all kinds of different things. I've always had sort of an inner knowing, sort of I don't know if I can say that I always felt like I had a guide with me or some kind of tap into something else. But over the years, of course, that I was a child then, the things I was drawn to, I didn't have quite the understanding that I obtained years later. I continued along my spiritual path. Some years, for a few years at a time, it would fall off, and I wouldn't be, as tuned into that or whatever. But for the most part, for most of my life, I have always had something spiritual with me, and it got really deep as I got into my mid to late 20s and right at 30. I had what I felt like was my first spiritual awakening. Now, I know this isn't for everyone, and trust me, I believe in critical thinking and logic and science and psychology just as much as I do my spiritual side. Absolutely. And I use them both on a regular basis. I personally feel like I need the balance of both, and just one would be too narrow for me. But that's me. So, just putting that out there. My videos are for educational, awareness, perspective, entertainment purposes only. I'm not advising or telling anyone they need to do anything. So I'm just putting that out there, what works for me. So I'm going to get into the topic of the addict mentality again here in just a second. But yeah, I've been going through that. I think a lot of people go through that in their 40s. I guess sometimes they call it maybe a midlife crisis. Sometimes it can be other things. There are a lot of changes going on in my life, and when we get into our 40s, a lot of changes go on in our body, and over the last few years, I ended up on a path I never expected to be on, and I went through things I never expected to go through. I lost several family members. They died. Some of it very tragic and sudden. I went through a lot in a relationship situation, and I got just about as far removed from my own identity as I think a person could get. And, all the things that I'd always warned myself about, all the things that I had studied hard and worked on and wanted to be careful about as I approached 40 and got into that, decade, happened to me. Literally happened to me. And I'm going to be making videos about that in the future, the things that I had to walk through. But had it not been for my spiritual tap and looking at it like, okay, there's a reason why you're having to walk through this, even though a lot of it is your absolute worst nightmare. This is not who you want to be. This is not who you are. I pulled a lot of lessons from it, though, and I tried to use it to a positive and productive advantage. Whatever adversity, whatever was being thrown at me in the last 5 to 6 years, I tried to take the pain, the grief, the anger of it, the unfairness, the betrayal of a lot of it, everything I was going through on that path while it was all happening. I mean, my whole entire life came out from under me. Life as I knew it. Empty nests going on, relationship issues going on, lost everything to my name. And it was for different reasons. And it was all, at the end of the day, choices that I made, yes. But when you wake up 6 years later and you're trying to rebuild from that, and while it was all going on, you were having to be so strong you couldn't even take time to really process it. I knew the risk of being too strong for too long. So I would stop and grieve sometimes and of course do some emotional work, because that's completely unhealthy not to. But I didn't get the time I really needed to do those things. I was too busy helping others that needed more time, others that situations were worse for them, giving them more time, them more energy, had to keep going, had to make money to survive, had to get myself out of the hole that I had fallen into. And, I had to be really strong for the last few years. And no, I didn't get to face the full blast of what I had done. Where have the years gone? What did I do? What on earth? How many years have gone by? I mean, and that is just how life happens. It really can. That is why I am desperate to get back to my practices of mindfulness, slowing it down a little bit, taking things one day at a time. The complete chaos that I had been involved in the last 5 or 6 years, again, there were many reasons why. And again, I had to have a spiritual tap. If I hadn't had that, my own something keeping me going, something higher than myself, something, and looking at it like I can use this as a positive, productive advantage. I will take all this adversity. I will learn from it. I will study it. Whatever they throw at me, whatever the hell is coming my way, I will process it. Yes, it hurts. Yes, it's maddening. No, I don't really want this. That's where a lot of outsiders get confused. They're like, people just want to go through that shit or they wouldn't go through it. Girls just want to date jerks, or people just want to be addicts, or or they just wouldn't be doing it. Okay, there is some truth to that. But sometimes there are circumstances beyond our control that, yes, due to some choices we made initially, things can snowball and snowball and snowball and spiral out. And before you know it, you are so far removed from anything that you ever wanted to be, any way that you ever wanted to live, and finding yourself having to rebuild from that. So I'm just, thankful that I did have something keeping me going all of that time, and using all that was happening to me to try and rebuild my life and use it as a way to learn, use it as a way to grow, do something positive and productive with those negatives that were thrown at me, the adversity that was thrown at me. And that's pretty much what I've been doing. But all in all, even though things are falling back into place for me, I'm still struggling. It is still hard to completely rebuild your life at almost 46 years old, when you were at one point sleeping in your car. And it's really hard. I did go to college. I did get an associate's degree. I was on a really great path for a while. And I just look at it like the things that I got distracted by, I look at it from a lot of different perspectives. In a spiritual perspective, a psychological perspective. A part of me feels like a lot of that came into my life and distracted me and gave me a lot of hell was necessary for spiritual and emotional growth purposes. Okay, I'll take it like that. That helps me to keep going. But at the same time, I'm angry with myself. I've got a lot of mixed emotions about the things that I did endure and go through. And I'm dealing with all of that currently. And so that now that it's all kind of calmed down, I had to start setting a lot of boundaries. I had to start making a lot of choices for my self-care, whether people liked it or not. And now that things are kind of settling back down again, things are manifesting for me. Things are getting a lot better, but I'm looking up 6 years older. And yeah, when you're getting into your 40s, it's like, wow, by the time you go through all that crap, that's why it's just really not good to put yourself through toxic situations for too long, because the damage will happen. It will happen. And when you're in your 40s, you are not going to bounce back from it like you did in your 30s or your 20s. You are not as resilient. Your mind might be, but it will take an effect on you. So I'm just saying, for me personally, I do have some regrets. There are things that I wish I had put a stop to a lot sooner. But at the same time, I take all of that as part of my life course, part of my lessons, things that I needed to do and work on. And if it hadn't been for those messy things, then I wouldn't have been able to get to a point where I am now. And that's very true. There were some things I needed, even though it came in a rough package. There were some things I needed from those situations. So anyway, but yeah, anxiety. I heard someone else talking about it today. It's rampant. And for me personally, I have to have a spiritual tap of some kind. That is what keeps me going. It's what helps me through hard times. It's what works for me. And of course, other practical choices like good self-care and what have you. Now, let me get into briefly the first 2 videos I posted on addict mentality. I said in the second part, I would continue on talking about how, because of the extreme way I was raised between two parents who were very opposite in personalities, I always had a sense of a multifaceted personality and being drawn to many different types of things at once, and kind of not feeling like I fit into any of those things, yet I loved them all in a way, and it was just kind of weird. And the same happens with me and the drug life, or addicts, or addiction. Because I was raised around it, it was a core part of me. Of course, I attracted people like that. And it's very hard to explain the balance I had to keep. But I did tell you guys about how phobic I was, how I had terrible anxiety. I told you about the pot smoking growing up for many years, and what I did, the drugs I did try. And then I had a very long, almost 25-year dry spell. I never did any really hard substances. And then, of course, I became addicted at 38 to opiates for 3 years. And it was weird for me, though. Most of my life, I had this very phobic personality. I was very, very careful. But because of my upbringing, of course, I ran around with nothing but alcoholics, addicts, a lot of the time criminals. I was a wild kid. I was out, I was on the run. But yeah, I gravitated towards a lot of stuff like that. It was always around me. And I would be the only one, not doing any of that stuff, because for number one, I was terrified. I was very phobic of that, and that was me, for many years. But before I get more into the conflict that was always within me about drugs and substances and addiction, the way I'm conflicted about it, where I don't totally fit in with the worst of the worst addicts, but I'm not on the completely clean side either, where I've never experienced substance addiction, and some terrible things that can happen to you during that time. I'm somewhere in the middle, okay? And I do want to delve more deeply into that feeling, because, we've got all these rehabilitation places. We've got the programs of Alcoholics Anonymous. We've got Narcotics Anonymous. We've got all these different teachings and programs, and everybody just kind of gets grouped into one as an addict. But to me, there are levels to it. There are differences in the thinking patterns, and I really think it's different for each individual addict. Everyone's story is different. What drove them to use the drugs or alcohol is different. And I've got a lot to talk about that mentality, what goes on in the mind of different addicts, okay? Lots to share on that in an upcoming video. Right now, I'm getting close on time. So I do want to go back, though, and remark about part 1 of the first video I posted on addict mentality out of the series I'm doing. And I was talking about how the responsibility, when you're addicted, the responsibility gets placed on everyone else. Blame for everything seems to go on everyone else. In that video, I was a little upset because someone's mother had made a remark to me about how a certain particular program had failed to help her son. Had failed him last time. She was disappointed that he had returned there because they failed to help him last time. And that really triggered me, because I know the truth of addiction. I know the truth from every context and every perspective, as falling into it for a short stint myself. So I got to see it from the actual being addicted to the substance perspective, and from years and years and years and years of my life of dealing with alcoholic and drug addicted relatives, parent, siblings, romantic partners, best friends, all around me. Being very close to people like that for years and years and years. And I know the process, and I know what goes on. And oftentimes, the elderly and the older family members are very clueless about what's going on in the mind of an addict, okay? But I know for a fact unless an addict is on, unless they're very early in their addiction, or they're on before they became addicted, they were on a very high level of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, good spiritual and emotional practices, unless they had dealt with their trauma, if they had trauma, been to therapy, unless they were working on a lot of those things and their self-esteem, coping, unless they had that inside prior to getting addicted, and then depending on how long you stay addicted, you will retain a lot of those things. You will always remember those things, and that's part of what helped me to stop what I was doing, because I had that first. A lot of people have emptiness. They don't have that stuff first. But depending on how long you stay addicted, the more and more and more all of that work that you did on yourself will go away. The more and more you will lose your integrity. You will lose your gratitude. You will lose everything depending on how long you stay addicted, okay? Now, I know a lot of people do shit. They do substances and they're functional and they don't consider themselves to be addicts or junkies or whatever the hell you want to call it. But honey, I've seen the worst of the worst of the worst, okay? The worst. The alcoholics that get up from the time they get up in the morning till the time they go to bed at night, they have to have a drink. They're shaking and puking and in bed for weeks and withdrawing and seizures. And I've seen it all. I've seen the people shoot up. I've seen family members. I've seen close friends go through it all, okay? And luckily, I never went that far with my addiction. I thank God every day, universe, whatever you want to say, because it's terrible. It's horrific once it gets a hold of you. And a lot of people out there say, well, that's a choice. It is a fucking choice. I agree. I get pissed off at severe addicts all the time. I've lived with one off and on for the last 6 years. We just went apart last year because I can't live around that kind of stuff anymore. I just can't. Because that wasn't my trip in the first place. It never has been. It happened to me, but it never has been my thing. It's just not. And so anyway, I don't want to get too far off track here. So back to the mentality of the addicts. It is a choice, but at the same time, it is a disease. They are both correct. Once it gets into you, if it's in your genetic, once you try that stuff and you condition yourself, it is a choice at first, though, for you to keep putting it in your body. You have a choice to say, no, fuck that, I'm not going to do it. Or while you're in the midst of severe addiction, you have a choice to say, I'm done. I'm done. I don't want this as a coping skill anymore. It doesn't fucking work for me. Look at all the people I'm hurting. I don't care what I have to do to make this stop. I will crawl to a meeting. I will crawl to a doctor. I will beg for help. I will do what I have to do. I will fight this. I may need medically assisted help, whatever it takes. That is a fucking choice. And I've seen many people, including someone I love very dearly, several people, lay up and flat ass fucking refuse to make that choice, no matter who they hurt, no matter how many times they almost die. It is. But you have to understand, after so many years of addiction, it is beyond them. It is beyond, okay, the addiction itself. It is a disease at that point. But they always have the choice to reach out to get the kind of help and support and medications, whatever they need, that will prevent them from using again. Now, they do have a fucking choice on that, and a lot of them will refuse. They'll make up all kinds of manipulations and excuses why they can't. I've watched it for years. I have watched it happen for years. And so that is a choice, but it is a disease once it gets into them for so many years that's completely beyond their power to stop. But they can make the choice to accept the help that's being given to them to prevent, to get in, whether it's taking medication, whether it's going to therapy, whether it's going into detox for a while and rehab for a while, whatever. They can make the choice to get the help that will help them put a stop to it. They can block themselves from getting it. They can make that choice, but it really gets in their brain, and especially if they've gone a lifetime, from their teens until their 40s or 50s, It has really settled into their brain. It is everything to them. So, I know all of this is controversial and everybody has their opinions on it. But that's what I don't like. And that's what I was talking about in part 1. How the responsibility when someone is addicted in our family or someone we love and care about, if we're not really educated on this stuff and we're not really aware, or if we're toxic ourselves, if we have undealt with and unprocessed trauma, if we have toxic defense mechanisms, if we're overly narcissistic or in denial a lot, maybe we're not an addict, but, maybe our thinking patterns are a little off. But for us to look at it like anyone else in this world failed our family member, failed our loved ones, like it's their responsibility, okay? Oftentimes, responsibility for everything gets put on other people. I've seen it a zillion times with these overly addicted people. They literally, depending on how long it's been going on, regress back into a very childlike, almost infantile state. I can say that because I fucking lived with it day in and day out. I got deep off into the psychology of the person, the mentality of the person, their actions every day, how their brain operated. And that's just what happens. They do, and they want to put responsibility for their entire life off on anyone else that they can. And so, I want to just make that very clear. It's no one else's responsibility. The life of an addict is their responsibility, their choices, their well-being. And a lot of times the loved ones that are close to the addict feel so responsible. They feel so guilty. They sit around worrying 24/7 about what am I not doing right? Am I not doing enough? What do I need to do today? This all gets put off on the partners or the loved ones of the severe addict, okay? And that's what that addict wants. It's very rare to find a severe addict who still has their integrity. I can go into that in a future video because I'm going to run out of time. But I had a family member at one point that she held on to her integrity for a long number of years, and even in her addiction. She was very careful about what she would come around and say and do and expose us to while I was raising my children. And she was very private in her addiction, and she had a lot of respect for me and my children. She was very careful about certain things, and I always appreciated that. But I know in other capacities out there in her world doing her thing, she may have not had the same integrities. But, every addict is different. That's why we can't just put one label on everyone. There are levels to this shit, okay? And, but generally, after a while, the drugs catch up. The mental disorders catch up. If you're living in the streets too long, you're living a certain chaotic lifestyle too long, it catches up and you can't even hold on to that same integrity. You start shitting on those family members. You start needing more than they can possibly give you. And relationships and family ties are ruined and destroyed by this stuff. Yes. But, like I say, so it is rare. After a person's been severely addicted for too long, it's really rare to find one with integrity. Until they sober up completely, until they are in a program and working it. But, again, that is what most severe addicts want you to do. They want everyone else to feel responsible for them. And that is not what's best for them. And really, we will be all the family members and everyone sitting around worried to death, thinking it's our fault, and it's not. We're not responsible for that. Nor are the rehab facilities. That type of thinking when she said that day, that type of thinking that bucks responsibility off onto a third party or another party. You get what I'm saying? That triggered me when I heard her say they failed to help my son. No. Your son failed himself. He's been failing himself. It's his responsibility. Even though his addiction is extremely progressed and he is in bad shape a lot of the time, he's failing himself. And it's not fair for the world to have to carry his responsibility, his guilt, his failures. That's not fair. Or anyone close to him. But that is what will happen, okay? And it makes me angry. It really does. When elderly family members are being affected, they're confused and stressed out. They're taking on all that weight. I've taken on all that weight for severe addicts for years. Cut it off. No. And so, yeah, we're not responsible. And